Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep into a story from the 17th century, a time of exploration, conquest, and of course, pirates. But this isn't just your typical pirate adventure. It's the true story of a small Irish fishing village called Baltimore, and a raid that changed lives forever and echoed through generations.
It really does go beyond the romanticized image of pirates. It's a complex historical event with lasting consequences. We'll see those unfold.
We're going to piece this story together using first-hand accounts. We have court documents, even personal letters from those who lived through it. We want to know not just what happened, but why it happened.
And what it tells us about the 17th century.
Exactly. And the human impact on both sides.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's set the scene. 1631, Baltimore, Ireland. Picture a small, peaceful village on the southwest coast. They relied heavily on the fishing industry.
Especially pilchards. Their arrival every year was vital for them. The community depended on it.
The people of Baltimore were a mix of English settlers and native Irish. Think of families like Joan Broadbrooks, going about their daily lives, the anticipation of the upcoming fair.
A sense of normalcy, a sense of peace. But underneath, there were tensions.
Oh, absolutely. King Charles I was facing challenges.
And there were disputes about who actually owned Baltimore.
Right. And then on top of all that, there were whispers of pirates in the area.
Causing unease for sure, but no one expected what was about to happen.
And that's where our story really takes a dramatic turn. Because on a seemingly ordinary Sunday evening, Baltimore was attacked by Barbary pirates.
And it wasn't just any attack, it was meticulously planned. Orchestrated by a figure shrouded in intrigue, a Dutch renegade.
Murat Reis, right?
Yes, also known as Jan Jansen, a fascinating, complex character. He was a skilled sailor, a shrewd diplomat, a convert to Islam, and yet he wanted to defect back to Christianity.
It's almost like he was playing both sides.
It does make you wonder what were his true loyalties.
Exactly. So why would a man like Murat Reis target a small village like Baltimore?
Well, that's one of the questions we'll explore. The sources give us some clues. Maybe he had a hidden agenda, a personal vendetta, or was it a desperate move to secure his return to Europe? We know he'd been talking to English agents.
Trying to get safe passage.
Yes, a new life. So was this raid a way to prove his loyalty to Algiers, or a gamble to gain enough wealth to defect?
It's a puzzle, especially considering his past. He'd actually helped Englishmen before.
He wasn't just motivated by greed or cruelty. It makes you think.
That's why I love these deep dives. We aren't just recounting the events.
We're trying to understand the motivations, the trousses, the forces that collided that night in Baltimore.
To really understand the raid, we need to understand the world it took place in. The 17th century was a time of global exploration, intense competition between European powers.
And the rise of the Barbary states as a force in the Mediterranean.
Piracy was a big part of that world.
It wasn't just criminals. It was a tool of war. A way for weaker nations to challenge the dominant European powers.
And Murat Reis was right in the middle of it.
His skills and ambitions made him a major player in this volatile world.
But his story, and the story of those captured from Baltimore, is a reminder that even the best-laid plans can go wrong.
And that history is shaped by the choices people make, even when caught in the currents of their time.
And that's what we'll explore next time. Join us as we delve into that fateful June evening in 1631.
As darkness settled over Baltimore, life went on as usual.
Families like Joan Broadbrooks were getting ready for bed.
Children were being tucked in.
You could hear laughter and conversation coming from the houses. A typical Sunday evening.
Completely unaware of what was happening just off the coast.
Murat Reis and his men were approaching, under the cover of darkness.
They used stolen fishing boats. Their oars muffled, they landed silently at a secluded cove.
The cove.
Exactly. And that was a strategic choice. That's where most of the fishermen lived. They were isolating a section of the village, maximizing the element of surprise.
Smart. So what happened next?
Murat had planned everything meticulously. He divided his forces into smaller groups, each one assigned to a specific house.
To ensure a quick and efficient operation.
Precisely.
I can just imagine these squads of men moving silently through the streets.
Like shadows.
Their target, the sleeping villagers. It's chilling.
The attack was designed to create terror but minimize casualties. Remember, they weren't there primarily for plunder.
Their goal was to capture people.
To sell as slaves in Algiers. The psychological impact was devastating.
Imagine the chaos. The screams of the janissaries. Homes going up in flames.
Those janissaries, the elite Ottoman soldiers, were masters of psychological warfare. Their uniforms, their war cries, their very presence, it was all meant to break the villagers' will to resist.
There's an account of one villager, Timothy Curlew, who decided to fight back.
Even though he was outnumbered.
Yes. Sadly, he was quickly overwhelmed and killed. A warning to anyone else thinking of resisting.
A grim reminder of the brutality of the raid. Families were torn apart, children taken from their parents.
And the story of Stephen Broadbrook. His pregnant wife and 2 young children were among those taken.
It just shows the human cost. Real people whose lives were changed forever that night.
More than 100 people were captured, mostly women and children.
Forced onto those waiting ships.
What must have been going through their minds? The terror, the confusion?
It's hard to fathom. The sources talk about the conditions below deck. Cramped, filthy, the constant fear of the unknown. For those villagers, it must have felt like a nightmare.
And as the ship sailed away, what happened to Baltimore?
The impact was immediate and devastating. The village, already struggling, never really recovered.
I bet the sense of security was shattered.
Absolutely, replaced by fear and suspicion.
It must have been terrifying.
Families abandoned their homes. They were afraid of more attacks.
The raid must have sent shockwaves through the whole region.
It did. It exposed just how vulnerable coastal communities were. The news reached the English authorities, and they faced a lot of criticism.
Accusations of negligence.
Exactly. It became a national scandal, a symbol of England's weakness against the Barbary threat.
And it really highlighted the complexities of dealing with the Barbary states.
Diplomacy, ransom demands, the slave trade. It was a tangled web.
But for the captives, their journey was just beginning.
They were headed for Algiers, a bustling, exotic city on the North African coast.
A place that would become their prison, their marketplace.
And for some, surprisingly, their new home.
Algiers was a world away from Baltimore.
It was a bustling city, a key port in the Mediterranean, a center of trade, a mix of cultures, languages, religions.
A real melting pot.
Yes, with Islamic and European influences everywhere. But for the captives, this exotic city was a place of captivity, uncertainty.
What was it like for them when they arrived?
They were paraded through the streets in chains.
A spectacle.
Exactly, to humiliate them, to reinforce their status as slaves.
Where were they taken?
The Pasha's palace, a grand, imposing structure.
To show them who was in control.
It would have been overwhelming, a stark contrast to their lives in Baltimore. And inside the palace walls, their fate was decided. They were now commodities.
To be sold at auction.
The Badistan, the main slave market, was a chaotic place, full of haggling, a constant reminder of their powerlessness.
Families were separated.
Often, yes. Their future depended on the whims of the buyers. Some were sent to the galleys.
Hard labor.
Rowing for hours in brutal conditions. Others were bought for domestic service, working in the homes of wealthy Algerians.
And some, the young women especially, were bought for other reasons.
Their beauty and youth made them vulnerable.
It's a horrific system.
It was, but there were some variations in experience.
Some glimmers of hope.
Yes. Some captives had valuable skills. They found themselves in less demanding roles.
Like William Oakley.
Yes, he was captured a few years after the Baltimore raid. He was given a choice of any trade, as long as it earned a certain sum for his master. He chose to sell wine and tobacco.
And he earned enough to buy his freedom.
An incredible story of resilience. And then there's James Cathcart. Captured alongside Oakley, he became a successful merchant, even a diplomat.
Wow, so even within slavery, there were opportunities for some.
For some, yes. But it's important to remember the vast majority faced hardship and exploitation. And then there was the option of conversion to Islam.
A complex decision.
Absolutely. Influenced by many factors. Coercion, opportunity, genuine religious conviction. Some seem to embrace their new faith, like Corrant Crawfin, a fisherman from Baltimore. He converted, married a local woman, built a new life.
You stayed in Algiers.
Yes. And his story, along with those of children raised as Muslims, show the lasting impact of the raid. It wasn't just a temporary disruption. It led to cultural exchange, religious conversion. Identities were reshaped across generations.
And those who didn't convert, what about them?
They clung to the hope of returning home. Years passed, failed attempts, dashed hopes, until 1646. Edmund Casson, an English envoy, arrived in Algiers.
His mission?
To negotiate the release of the captives.
It must have been a difficult task.
It was. He had to navigate Algerine politics, haggle over ransoms, and face the fact that some captives no longer wanted to return. But eventually, he secured the release of those who wanted to go home. including Joanne Broadbrook.
And Ellen Hawkins.
Their homecoming was bittersweet. They were free, but they had also experienced loss, and Baltimore wasn't the same place they remembered.
It's a story with so many layers. Brutality, resilience, loss, adaptation.
Choices made under duress.
The unexpected turns life can take.
It challenges us to look beyond simple narratives, to see the human stories within this historical event.
It makes you think about the 17th century world. Global trade, clashing cultures, the impact of encounters between different societies.
And it raises questions that are still relevant today.
Questions about cultural exchange, religious tolerance, the human capacity for cruelty and compassion. The raid on Baltimore might seem like a small event,
but it offers a window into a complex and fascinating era.
and it makes us think about the choices we make, the consequences we face, the resilience of the human spirit. What a story.
It really is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.